Yeah, so I'll get started kind of by describing like the UT Urban Teachers Program and what that's about. A little back history for me, I'm at UT as like a post-bac student, so I'm here like only to get a teaching certificate. I earned my undergrad online while working full time in creative writing. And I realized like I was working in banking and corporate world and it was terrible there. And you talk about like a lack of empathy, like you kind of become like a robot in those situations and in those environments. And I started thinking about how our schools kind of like set us up to become those people. Um, so yeah, so I like started looking at teaching programs because I knew I wanted to like share what I'd learned about English and language arts. And then I found this program at UT and it was like focused on social justice education. And I like that was so radical to me at the time. And now that I'm in it, I'm like, oh, can I scream this from the mountaintops? I'll tell anybody about it. But learning about it has been really interesting because we focus a lot on like not just decentering the teacher, but like decentering like colonialist values, like white supremacist values, and then like white majority values in general, because those voices and ideals have been privileged in the classroom. So that's kind of what UT Urban Teachers is about, is like prepping pre-service teachers to come into the classroom and to like shake things up, to focus on, you know, student-centered learning, building identity, anti-racist teaching, and being like very like open and kind of and proud about it. So I'm Monica, do you want to add anything to that?
No, you pretty much covered it. We also do kind of like internships with schools here in the area of Austin. So right now we're doing that. It's all on Zoom, which is something else, but it's been nice to like see like how to put things that we learn about in practice with some of the teachers that we're coupled with that are doing the same kind of work in these like urban spaces that need the help that these teachers are giving and that we're being pushed to do as well. So yeah, my name is Monica. I am from South Texas. It's a border city. So I kind of grew up in this, maybe not in an urban setting, but like in a school that would, with a population of kids that would probably be thought of as like an urban school. Um, so I kind of come from that background. And when I came into UT, I'm an English major and um, I took a class here that was like Mexican American literature, and it just like changed my world, I guess, like the way that I thought about literature, because I never, like in that class, I learned about people who are like me, from authors that are like me, and heard student voices who were like me. And that's never something that I had in my school growing up, even though I went to like a predominantly Latinx like setting school. And so that kind of made me want to like do that for other students, kind of like give back what like we haven't had. And so when I found about the UT Urban Teachers Program, they aligned themselves with kind of what I wanted to do. And like Erica said, social justice and like diversifying and decolonizing our classrooms. And it's like really important work because I don't know, it's really hard growing up when you don't have like teachers that look like you or a curriculum that like reflects who you are and like what the world is like, your history. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a valuable program for like the students and for us as well. And it's kind of things that are important to teach, not just for like students of color, but like white students and like every person, just because you're like, I feel like a white centered curriculum kind of like feeds into misinformation and can be very dehumanizing, and it doesn't really help the situation that we're in right now. So I think it's good for everybody.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, please.
Can you, I'm sure you're probably gonna get to it, but can you tell me like what exactly is the UT Urban Teacher Program and like who do you guys serve or who do you guys teach?
I don't know if you heard like the You Teach, like liberal arts, and there's like a You Teach. It's kind of like that. It's like a different branch of it. But this one specifically is only for like teachers that or people that want to become teachers in like the social studies and ELA area in like secondary school, so like middle school and high school. And it's very much like it's very intentional about using like a social justice lens and like equity work. So that's kind of like what the program is, and it's like a 3 semester like program for to get a teacher certification by the end of the program. And it's open to most majors in the liberal arts college. But I mean, I hadn't heard about it, but I think Erica said last time in a meeting that we had that they were thinking of opening it up to other major or like other like subjects besides English and social studies. So that may be coming later.
Yeah, I think that's coming from the College of Ed. Like they're talking about expanding it. And then the person who like heads up this program is Dr. Allison Scarrett. So she and then Dr. Salinas is very involved in it, and then Dr. Deb Kelt, or I don't know if Deb Kelt, she may just be Professor Deb Kelt, but those are like the 3 like top people in our program coming down. And so do y'all have any questions? Like, I mean, I could just start talking about anything.
How do you center your curriculum around COVID and navigate an online classroom setting while also trying to provide the same kinds of experiences for students?
So one thing that like I'm learning from observing my cooperating teacher, and then also we taught at a for a nonprofit organization that called Breakthrough Central Texas over the summer, and they put like first generation college grads like through high school and college. It's like not really a tutoring service, but more like a mentor service for students, and we did all that online too. And to be honest with you, like you can't provide the same kind of support for students online. And like where you're centering on, you know, teaching something and getting them to get a grade, like helping them to get a grade, but also focusing on emotional learning. I feel like over the summer we were able to do that more because it was a very low stakes curriculum. Like they were working towards like a project at the end of the summer program, where they basically just explored like self-identity based on the grade they were in and who was teaching them, but it was like very fluid. And then Breakthrough is also very social justice oriented too. And so I felt like we had a lot of leeway, but now that we're observing classrooms like under Austin ISD, it's a lot stricter because they not only have to ensure that they're taking attendance in order to receive their funding, but on top of that, they have to get grades in order to, I guess, keep their data up, which watching like the teacher that I have, she's really great about like checking in with her students and saying like, how are you doing? Like point blank, like, and when they start telling her like what they're working on, like she's like, no. How are you doing today? And the students for the most part are pretty open and honest. But I've noticed like some teachers are getting like so stressed with like having to get the grades and having to make sure the attendance is there that they're kind of foregoing that like emotional caring at the beginning of class. Like LBJ has a like an SEL, social emotional learning period at the very beginning of the day where all the students like check in, and I guess they go through like different ways for supporting like kids' emotional health and mental health and all of those things. But then I think once they get into class, it's like teachers are automatically just going through whatever curriculum it is to try to get them to get their work turned in, because students are so behind. They're like logging in for the first time. Like every week there are new students, at least for the teacher I'm observing. So like it's really hard actually. Um, I know that the teacher I have really cares, but like there are so many like rules that she has to follow in order to make sure that she's like checking all of these boxes for the admin, that sometimes I think that kind of like puts blinders on to what we should be doing for students. And I don't want to say that that's not her fault at all, but it really takes away from like making sure like the kids are okay. But some ways that we do try to like help with that is like doing a mood board check-in or like a vibe check, and literally just like taking the first 5 minutes of class to not set an agenda, to not talk about what's due and what's missing, but literally just to say, how do you identify with this fictional character or cartoon character? And usually it's representative of some kind of emotion like bored or tired or like ecstatic, things like that. And that's when you see like the most participation from students, like in the chat. We don't get to see their faces a lot on Zoom. And I feel like that's the kind of community building we need to focus on right now. But the district doesn't really let that happen.
What how receptive would you say, like, or I don't know if it's AISD that you guys would end up working in, but like when you do, I guess, learn the social justice framework and how to incorporate it in your curriculum, like what school districts would let you like teach that in when you end up working for them? Or is ASD pretty receptive to that?
I honestly don't know like how each district works as of now. I mean, it looks like AISD might be doing that kind of stuff, but I think it's ultimately up to the teachers and like that department, like what they decide to do, because I don't think that the district has like any required like readings that kids have to do except for like standardized like learning standardized for the standardized tests that they have at the end of the year. So I think it's really up to the teachers and like that department specifically like what they want to do. I definitely feel like there's going to be districts that are going to give you pushback if you are trying to do this type of work. But yeah, I think for your question, I wouldn't be sure, but it really depends like what kind of teachers you have in the schools as well.
Yeah, and I've noticed, and maybe y'all have too, a couple of things, even specific to Texas, where teachers, even just in their virtual classroom, put up, like a Black Lives Matter sign or like a rainbow flag for LGBTQ rights, and like teachers have been reprimanded for that. And that's online. Like they're not even explicitly saying like this is what I stand for. It's literally just like a nonverbal cue to like tell students that this is a safe space for them. And districts are pushing back, and it's not all of them, but it's definitely like makes you nervous about like where you're going. But when we've asked teachers that same question, and thankfully they're Austin ISD teachers, but they just tell us, that's what you look for when you like look for a job at a school, is like if the administration and then also like the department head, if they like support that kind of teaching and if they're going to give you that kind of leeway. But at the same time, like when I think about like I come from a small town in East Texas, and I think about pulling this social justice rhetoric and curriculum into the school, and I envision a lot of pushback, and I think that that would still happen. Like that was back in like 2012 and even now. But it also, with what we're learning, I feel more equipped to go into a district like that, like a smaller, more conservative district, and really try to like just like be rowdy, which may not be the best way. Like I just like really want to go in and shake things up because um I'm just like ready to advocate for um students like me, but also all the students who were not like me, who the school system was not written for, who the curriculum was not written for. Obviously, I succeeded because it was written through a white gaze, So like, I want to go in and make sure like everybody has the same opportunity I did.
Do you put like do you value putting pressure on like statewide curriculums, or is the focus more like stylistic, like decisions within the classroom?
So the TEKS is like Texas Education Knowledge and Skills. It's actually apparently it was updated recently, and it's actually kind of um what's the word? Like abstract. Not it's like it tells you exactly what you need to teach, but it leaves room for interpretation. So you definitely get to bring those stylistic choices into the classroom. I think we really need to change like standardized testing. So that kind of curriculum focus needs to be shifted because the No Child Left Behind Act is, I don't know if that's still like written in law after Obama took over, but it's definitely still a mentality for Texas education. Um, so yeah, definitely something we get to play around with though. And like our professors are really encouraging that too, which makes it fun.
What are some like I guess salient of examples of things that you're like, hey, I don't like how this is currently being covered, whether it be history or actually usually typically history is the most obvious one. It's like, oh, there's that tinge. What are like I guess in the non-history subjects that you're like, oh, this is only covered in a white way rather than I guess being receptive to the needs of other students.
Eric and I are both in like the ELA cohort. So there's definitely like what kind of books are you teaching, and like who is represented in those books, or even I think because there are no required books. I think the only one that is like one of those is like To Kill a Mockingbird, and so if you were to do that, like you can definitely teach that. You would just have to like focus on how is race being represented, who is writing it, like what does it say about the society and the characters. But definitely like what kind of books you're reading, what kind of voices you're centering in the classroom are a big like focus. I think I have a friend who is trying to become a teacher as well. She was a math major. Right now she's in grad school, but she's also doing this kind of work with like social justice in her math classroom. I don't really know much about that, but like I appreciate that these like conversations are happening through like all the other subjects that there are. I do follow some accounts on Instagram that like have talked about like what you can do in art history classrooms or just like art classrooms, like whose paintings are you showing, like how are you representing people. So I really think it like comes to down to like again like who are you representing, whose voices are being heard, but also just when you're teaching like how are you helping students and what like framework are you viewing students, like is it deficit, is it asset based, how are you like what biases you have might influence your teaching, and how are you treating those students based on that.
And then to get, and I just thought of this, like to get more specific and like focused on the students versus like us bringing in, but like really fostering like, we learned it as translanguaging, which is basically a different way of talking about like English language learners or emergent bilinguals, which I think emergent bilinguals is, I don't find that problematic when I hear it, but I also am hearing it from a monolingual perspective. But yeah, like bringing in translanguaging, and that this applies to like all subject matter, like and understanding that students who speak a language other than English as their first language, understanding that they think in those terms sometimes better than in English, and like allowing them to process all of this new information and even existing information in a way that's more comfortable for them, like in terms of language, because we take notes all the time and things like that. And then you build kind of like that relationship foundation, I think, through that, by like giving like every aspect of a student's voice like agency, and that way y'all are able to work together moving forward, knowing that you still have to like refine your responses to things in English specifically, like to fit this kind of like Eurocentric mold that the curriculum has taken on for like passing and graduating. And then also, going into college, that's still there. Like most colleges students go to are what I think most people are now calling like historically white colleges, because that's what they are. And so like being able to name those kinds of things and put those images not just in students' heads, but like in our peers' heads. I think that helps for a more cohesive like conversation.
I think taking like considering that in this situation that does require like speaking truth to power and that is scary and school districts don't like that. And I think it's especially in like your position as a teacher where like you're so attached to the kids and like what's going on in the classroom is so important to you. But there's also these like unjust systems like asking you to do things that like you aren't comfortable with. Have y'all worked with or talked to like Education Austin at all? Is the labor union that Austin ISD teachers work with? I'd be interested to see if any of those teachers have an understanding of like how they can balance like being like rowdy and like troublemakers and speaking up for themselves and their peers with also like kind of managing some of those fears that are present.
I found Education Austin just recently on Facebook, so I have been meaning to do more research on it. I'm not really sure like how that works, and I also don't understand how that many teachers have unionized without like losing their jobs, because apparently you're already a union like when you're part of a union when you become a teacher. So having like a third party system like that, I don't know how it works, and I'm really interested. But I'm glad you asked that, because they seem to like put a lot of good work out, and they are like very like vocal in like the Austin scene. That may be something, Monica, we could do. Like we could have, I feel like we could have them come to one of our meetings and speak to. I don't know if that would make people upset though.
For our org, we've been having several speakers, or we've had 2 speakers so far, but we're still a very small program and organization. But like if we ever do have any other events, like everybody's is welcome to come. Like if y'all want to hear about something, like we'll definitely send out an invitation, and you all can come as well.
I'm curious to know if any of y'all have like any unique um, learning experiences, whether it was in like primary, secondary, or even like higher education. Like, is there anything that like you wish maybe your teachers or your school district had done differently? Um, or just what was it like for you in general, if you are willing to share?
I guess from my personal experience, like I guess it was only until later I noticed that I guess it wasn't catering to certain groups, because like I was born in India and my parents are from India. So like when I was a kid, like it didn't make sense. I was like, oh, I came all the way from India, and so I was like, I just assumed that other kids who came from immigrant backgrounds, they would just have learned, um, they would have just learned English or like had those experiences similar to me. They like I feel like, oh, as you would have grown, you would have just learned it. But I was only like maybe like when I grew up a little bit older, like fourth or fifth grade, or early junior high, I was like, oh, there's like a lot of people. Even their parents themselves know English. Like I guess India was a British colony, so like my parents were fortunate to know English and also would teach me. And obviously, there's like cultural differences. Like it didn't really hit that certain things weren't necessarily catered to me. Like it wasn't something even I thought of, that I guess I became more cognizant of later.
Failing on the language stuff, I guess something that frustrated me was that my language wasn't supported in school. They kind of just expected me to follow a certain path of like English language development, and then after I reached that certain threshold, they cut off all Spanish education for me, which I feel like in a district that was majority Latinx, doesn't make sense, considering they also said like bilingualism is so good for you, like, oh my God, you have to learn a second language, but they didn't bother supporting it after, I guess for me, it was a first grade.
Yeah, I definitely had that same experience. I was originally born in Mexico and then I moved here and I started learning English. And so my first year, like I would do all my coursework in Spanish and then go like learn English somewhere else, like in that same school. And then after I like got proficiency enough to like be left alone, like Spanish was not really incorporated in my classroom. But one of the things that I'm really liking about our program is like kind of like what exactly what Erica was talking about earlier with translanguaging, just like realizing the value in like students' knowledges and their languages and like using that in the classroom. Like right now we're, at least in my classroom that I'm working with, we work with like emergent bilinguals. Some students are like really new to the country and so they're still learning English. And so we always encourage them like, oh, like you can write in whatever language that you want, like use what you know to like kind of like learn these skills, but like it's not like I definitely agree that that should have been something that's been has been done and that needs to be done. I don't know what I'm saying right now, but like my point is like yeah, I agree. I feel the same way. And that's definitely something I want to do in my classroom, like allow students space, like give them space for them to use like all the knowledges that they know and they have and like use them for their own learning and to just kind of like keep nurturing their language and like who they are as a person.
This is maybe more of a minor problem, but because I was just a white kid in like mostly like white schools, but I was very very like obese growing up, and um, we used to have this thing called field day once a year, and it was fun, but I was like, I kind of grew to like hate it because all the activities were like team based, and me being like a really like fat kid meant that I always felt really bad because like whatever team I was on, like we would always lose like because of me. And like I feel like field day is obviously supposed to be like something really fun that I like should have been excited about, but because of the way it was structured, like I just was not excited about it because I was just not ready for my classmates to like clearly not want to be on my team because like me being on their team meant that like we were going to lose, you know. um so like maybe like something like field day, maybe they could do like other activities that cater to kids who are definitely not athletic, you know.
Yeah, and thanks so much for sharing that. Sorry if I'm talking over anybody. I you said that you thought it might be minor. I don't think that's minor at all. I think that just goes to show like how many students' stories are kind of just like looked over or washed over because they're just they're just not privileged. Like they just don't, for whatever reason, they're not valued. And so hearing that like puts that in someone like mine and Monica's head who are like training to be teachers. And so this is something we're going to think about moving forward. And it's part of that social justice framework that we can go in and try to like shake up and make sure that like all students are being met at some equitable place, whether it's field day or you know, writing an essay.
Just to like go off of that, my school did something similar, and I had friends that would just like dread that day for like weeks because just like I don't want to do this. Like I don't, and also like I had friends with anxiety who were just like I don't want to like get into this random like hyper competitive state. I'm not a sports person. I'm not an athletic person, and now all of a sudden I'm just like I don't know. It just seems like a random like forced participation thing to have. Optional, I optional is fine, but like when you're just like forcing everybody to do it, there's so many like different groups that you're not like they don't belong in that net.
Yeah, I think with that, like what comes to my mind is like there need to be more conversations around like mental health and like how the school environment and like the pressures to like fit in or do a certain type of thing, like looking a certain type of way can affect people and like young children. And like doing better at that just because like I mean every like you both of you like two people in this room already have talked about like a struggle with that same type of idea, and so I definitely think that that's something that the education system needs to work on, and like that's something that as future teachers that we should like be thinking about doing in the classrooms. So thank you for sharing that.
And I guess I was gonna add like something obvious, but like that kind of is like a testament to how important like the work you guys are doing is like people only know what they know, which I know sounds very obvious, but it really is like if everything you're like your perceptions of the world and how you interact with it is based on that prior knowledge. If there's maybe an error or like some like the variations in that prior knowledge would lead to like misunderstandings. Like for example, like up until really high school or like early college, like the only thing I'd heard about the Civil War like throughout junior high education or elementary education was like, oh yeah, slavery was part of it, but like it really wasn't about slavery. It was about states' autonomy in the South. It was about bigger issues than slavery. And like so slavery was just a what is it? They always framed as it was a strategic move by Abraham Lincoln, and like they'd always gas up Jefferson Davis and stuff in those early I guess junior high lessons. I don't know if that's just the part of Texas I was from, but that'd be an example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I've grown a lot since I've come to UT. Like most of my learning around these types of things have happened here, thanks to like courses I've taken, like peers I've surrounded myself with, and like professors that are doing this type of work. And then like I think another like aspect of that is like only giving a certain part of the story. Like what does that do to make students feel who are not being represented, who are being erased or misrepresented? Like I think it was last year I took a class that was about learning the history of like historically marginalized communities and like in the education system. And so I learned like Black history, Asian American, Mexican American, and like Indigenous history around like and their experiences in school. And like I remember feeling so like angry all the time because I was like, why didn't I know this before? Like, why didn't I learn about me? Why didn't I learn about like the people around me? Like, why has this been hidden? And it's like we're doing a disservice. Like you said, like people only know what they know. And so if we don't teach them these kinds of things, like how are we gonna learn what's happened? How do we like move on and like become better if we don't even acknowledge like the history and like the reality of things? And also like being mindful of like if we're not talking about a certain group or representing people, like that's gonna like hurt them at the end because like you're not validating their existence basically. So yeah.
And Monica, I think that ties back into what you said earlier about not having like teachers that were like representative of where you come from. And that's another big issue is like, I think I don't know the exact stats, but well over 50% of the teaching force are like white women in particular, but just white. And like when you only know what you know, then you're perpetuating the problem. But I feel like if we open up a space for more teachers of color to come in and have like really open conversations with students that like can confide in them because they see themselves in them, then I feel like that opens like coming back to conversation and like dialogue. Like I think that opens up like a space for everybody to just like talk about these things because we're not talking about these things. And I think part of the problem is because we're in this like majority white space where like you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to hold everybody else accountable necessarily because you're all doing the same thing and you're all privileged in this space and you don't really have to worry about any kind of like strict backlash. So yeah, I think we definitely need a more diverse like teaching arena.
That's why I also said the thing about the curriculums earlier, because like most textbooks that are like approved by the state of Texas do just like they centralize the states' rights idea. Some of them are just blatantly racist. And so like I really think yes, the representation is a really big part of it, but if you can just like get the worm out of the core as well and like actually teach things that happened and are fair to the parties involved, then that'll do just so much. But I also don't know what the clear answer to that is because we can't exactly just go write our own textbooks.
I was going to type this in the chat while you were talking, but like and this may be kind of a hot take, but I've come to know like traditional history lessons as what are now like white nationalist propaganda. It's really a way to like suppress any ideas that like America's fucked up in any way. And we're now like, you know, being in a pandemic and then having all of these like protests happen over the summer, people are like, okay, something is clearly wrong. And so I'm thankful for that in a way. It's like really weird, but yeah, it's just, it's hard to look back to like reflect on that and think like, wow, I've kind of been just like brainwashed, which it goes into that you only know what you know. And it's like, you have the responsibility to educate yourself, but when you are entrusting yourself to a school system that has been set up to help you succeed, supposedly, like you would think that they would, you know, be held accountable and you wouldn't necessarily have to hold them accountable.
How are you guys being trained to deal with parents who push back against social justice ideas? Because I know where I went to school, it was a bunch of country people, like really conservative country people. So if you said anything that wasn't like whatever the hell they wanted to hear, it was a serious problem.
I feel like we're not really getting trained to deal with that kind of stuff. It's more of like, it's gonna happen at one point and like you're gonna have to keep fighting is basically what, or at least from what I've been getting. Like, I think there's also like no way to prepare you for that. It's just kind of like, are you gonna like stick to your values and what matters to you and like kind of have to take it? Or are you gonna just give in? And it's like complicated, right? Because like, you know, it's also like, you're thinking about the students but you also have to think about yourself and like, this is your job. Like, I know you may need this job, like you need to support your family or something. So it's complicated, but I think it's more about like, are you going to compromise who you are and what the students need and what the world needs? Or are you going to have to like give in to them, or are you going to find a middle space? I don't know, but there hasn't really been like training on that, or like, yeah, some of the teachers that we've talked to have been saying like, you're just going to have to like fight through it is basically what they've done.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of like scared of that part of the teaching. We're all a little intimidated by it.
This is sort of like diverting from that topic, but how do you value like sex education in terms of teaching through the lens of social justice? And is that like a potential avenue that y'all could explore beyond like English and history?
I like highly value sex education. I didn't know that like the sex education curriculum for Texas hadn't been updated since like the 80s until I saw that I think it was like the 80s. And then I saw that, you know, LGBTQ rights activists were like coming out around like the Texas Board of Education, like reevaluating that. And they were even just trying to push for like sex education, just teaching kids to like treat people from the queer community as people, even just to acknowledge them as people. And like the Texas State Board of Education just like said no, like they didn't. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that's on our list. we haven't explicitly talked about sex education in our coursework, or I haven't, because I'm very specific to like what the Urban Teachers program is, but I know like youth and community studies they might go deeper. I don't know if they have, Monica. But I would be interested in seeing how that changes up, because you know, a lot of those Protestant values are pushed on students in sex education. It's a lot of shame rather than like actual information and knowledge. So I think that's definitely something that we should be more knowledgeable about outside of our like core subject that we're teaching. Definitely something to explore.
How would y'all feel, like, I guess schools are kind of adapting to maybe address those needs in terms of like school events? Like, I know like recently, like sometimes you have like a country day or a cultural day, but like beyond that, how do you think schools are doing, good or bad? Or like how do you think we're doing on sort of inclusive events, or maybe even like school lunches, or I don't know.
I think, well, it was like Latinx Heritage Month, like last month, or like part of this month as well. And at least in the school that we're at, they were gonna have like, I don't actually know if it ended up happening, but like they were gonna have like a screening of something. Like in my schools that I went to, I don't remember there being any type of like specific celebrations for people of any sort. I think they don't necessarily have to be a bad thing if you have them, if it's not something that you celebrate just once in like the school year. Like it has to be like a constant acknowledgement and celebration of that community and all communities. I I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Erica?
Just pulling from some of our coursework, kind of in our adolescent literacies course that we took, I think it's about like, you know, those events take place at school, but like Monica was saying, like it needs to be like sustained. It needs to be culturally sustained. And part of that activity, I think, is like becoming involved in those communities outside of school, because that's how you get to know students. And then you kind of, and then you like, then on top of that, you build like a relationship with parents too. So that takes away some of that intimidation factor from the question earlier of like actually talking to them when your values clash, maybe. But yeah, we have to incorporate it from outside of the school, because people act like the school is a vacuum and everything has to happen in this one space, but like in all actuality, like people are learning from every single space they inhabit. So yeah, we have to keep that in mind.
I know this is probably necessarily not a focus of the urban teaching program, but like I wanted to ask if it is, like, how is climate change or like those type of issues and environmental issues kind of spoken about in schools? Or are they spoken about at all, or is it kind of viewed as a taboo topic that's like more political than science?
I'm sure there's places where it is viewed in that way. I don't know about the specific school that I'm going to right now. I also don't think we've explicitly talked about climate change and addressing it in the classroom, which we can talk about in the program as we move forward. Because like the professor are like, oh, if you want to talk about something specific, like let us know and we can include it. So thank you for that. We'll like definitely bring that up. But I think, I mean, if you're talking about equity and social justice, like it is something that you need to talk about. And like if we're talking like colonialism and all those like these systems of oppressions, like all of this is still going on and all these communities are being affected by everything that happened before and kind of like all these injustices that are happening right now. And so you can definitely like do lessons over it. You can talk about it if you're talking about, I don't know, a specific group in regards to like a book, like you can bring up like, oh, this community is going through this right now. Or just like, I mean, I think there's a lot, I mean, it's really valuable to talk about like current events, and like you don't necessarily for like an ELA classroom just have to teach a book. Like you can bring up an article and be like, this is what we're going to talk about today. This is what's happening. And like kind of bring that awareness in that way. Because like it's something that's affecting everybody and specific communities more. And so I don't think it's fair to like leave that out of the curriculum. And so, yeah, I think it's something that needs to be done more. Yeah, I don't know how other schools or other teachers have been doing it, but it's definitely something that needs to happen. And yeah.
From your observing, has it been brought up or not necessarily in those grades, or you haven't seen it?
Not in my classroom. I think it was, not in mine. Not so far anyway. So yeah, I don't know if that will happen, but yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been brought up in mine either. But I also like attribute some of that to like people understanding that it's like real, that it's a science. Like you said, like it's not taboo. Like we all know it's not something you believe in, it's something that's happening. But I think it's can be so like paralyzing to think about like how, how to talk about it, and then how to act on it. So sometimes I just think people haven't even let themselves think about that part yet. I have been lucky enough to already push through that somehow, and like I focus on like things that I can do. I don't really know how to like translate some of those things to people without saying you should be composting your stuff, stop eating meat, like recycle, so it's in a way I'm trying to like I have been thinking about how I could incorporate that into a classroom, in a way that doesn't like shame students into like caring about the planet. Um, I hope we can find a teacher that is kind of like that.
Actually just remembered that in the school that Eric and I are going to, there's one teacher that is starting a green club. And I don't really know much about it because she brought it up in a meeting that I went to last time, like very briefly, but I'm pretty sure it's like an environmental club. So, I mean, it is happening. I just don't know, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's still new, so I don't know how much they're doing right now, but the conversations are starting to happen, I guess.
On a similar note, how do you approach serious topics that students are exposed to without paralyzing them? Particularly ones that are affecting their communities or them specifically?
I think that's a hard question, but it's definitely one that you have to like think over when you're talking about these things. Because these, like for one person in the classroom, it can be like, oh, I'm just learning about it, and then other people like they're living it. But I think just like approaching it from like a caring way and like driving these discussions and conversations in a way that is not putting the burden on those people that are living through that to like carry the conversation and like force them to like tell us about their experiences, because that like can be very like can bring up trauma, or like they shouldn't be the ones teaching us and we shouldn't be pressuring them into talking about things that they don't want to talk about and they shouldn't talk about, that we should be knowing about, rather than like waiting for somebody else to tell us. I think like Erica said, it's like a big task to like approach it in a way that isn't paralyzing, because I don't know, maybe there's just going to be one student that will be paralyzed by it and will be scared by it, and like maybe you can't help like avoiding that, but I think it's the way that you approach it and how you have those conversations that matter. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Reese, I know you were doing a lot kind of work with handling, I guess, climate anxiety. So like, what have you kind of seen as like best practices to convey that type of information? Like, what's the most sensitive?
I start the training later next week.
Oh, okay then.
So
We'll reach out then.
you're I'll follow up with you for sure. Because that's like exactly like how do we talk
Okay.
about this? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be definitely interested to attend that and learn more for sure.
I guess I kind of come back to like how is like I guess in addition to climate crisis, like there's obviously kind of other problems going on right now. Like how is like kind of like the events of the summer or Black Lives Matter movement kind of handled, or is that kind of brought up or not really, or like our teachers like, oh, if you ever need to talk about any of these things, you know, approach us.
So with the nonprofit that we worked with in the summer, like students were encouraged to like explore themselves and what was happening in the world around them. So like a lot of the students or some of the students like based their projects on like there was one that I saw that was on like redlining, another one on like the disparities in like how COVID is affecting certain communities more than others, like Black and Latinx is what they were focusing on. And so like the students were doing that and they were like in middle schoolers and they're doing that. Right now where I'm in like the school that I'm at, we haven't done that. I think it's also a little more challenging because I'm in an ESL class. And so like just being in the classroom and like dealing with all the technology can be very overwhelming sometimes for them. That doesn't mean that they can't have these conversations and do this, but I think we're still like learning how to like teach and like best serve them in this online space. But I know that like, or I don't know if Alex has done that kind of stuff in her classroom. But like in the summer, like students were encouraged to like explore into that and like talk about that and have those conversations.
Yeah, I haven't seen it brought up in Alex's class, but you know, we do have some leeway to like create our own lesson plans and bring those in, even as like we're intern twos this semester. So all we really have to do is observe and like teach 4 lessons, and the rest is just like sitting back and just watching things fold out, um, unfold, whatever. Anyways, but yeah, I think they would totally support us if we wanted to do something like that. It's just about like whether or not we're like ready. Next semester we start, like Monica and I both start student teaching, and I think at that point we can really like dig into that. But I would like to do that now because like all the students are living through it too, and I would assume that most of them, if they don't have access to social media, the news is on it in their house at some point, you know? So they're seeing this and they're probably seeing themselves represented in it, but how many people are actually talking about it around them, you know?